In the darkness of a desolate road, beneath the faint glow of streetlights flickering as if about to fade, a lonely man drove through the night, carrying a heart weighed down by endless, meaningless days. But then, his gaze caught a trembling shadow, a frail, abandoned German shepherd, bearing within her the lives soon to be born. She was afraid, distrustful, yearning only to flee from a world that had turned its back on her, yet fate had placed them on the same path. When he reached out, no one could have foreseen what would happen. A fleeting moment of surprise, a miracle amidst despair, and a story that will stir your heart with every beat. This is not just a tale of survival. It's the journey of two lost souls finding each other, healing each other, and together composing a melody of hope, love, and faith. Listen closely, for that night, everything changed, and you won't believe what unfolded under the light of those solitary stars. The night descended like a thick black curtain, punctuated only by the dim, flickering yellow of streetlights, like tiny flames struggling against the darkness. Daniel Carter, 37 years old, sat in his weathered old truck, hands gripping the steering wheel, his eyes blurred with exhaustion after a grueling shift stretching beyond 12 hours at the factory. His short brown hair was disheveled, dusted with grime, his bloodshot eyes heavy as if begging to close. The steady hum of the engine was a familiar sound, almost invisible, blending into the stillness of the empty suburban road. Tonight, all he wanted was to get home, collapse onto his worn-out bed, and escape, forget the job, the loneliness, the long days without purpose. But fate, sometimes, refuses to let us rest. Suddenly, the headlights swept across a faint silhouette by the roadside, near a cluster of trees so dark they seemed a wall separating this world from an endless void. Daniel hit the brakes, the truck slowing, and as the light sharpened the scene, his heart skipped a beat. It was a German shepherd, thin and frail, her once glossy coat now dull and matted with dirt and the chill of the night. She stood there, her legs trembling as if on the verge of collapse, but what stole Daniel's breath was her swollen, round belly. She was pregnant, and from her fragile state, he sensed it. Only hours, perhaps minutes, remained before she would give birth. Alone in this remote nowhere, with no one around, she looked so small, so vulnerable, it pierced his heart with an ache he couldn't name. "What's she doing out here?" Daniel whispered, his voice faltering in the silent expanse. He tightened his grip on the wheel, a strange mix of sorrow and helplessness swelling within him. She recoiled as the light touched her, ears flattening, tail tucking tight against her body, her deep brown eyes glinting with raw fear. It wasn't just wariness of a stranger, it was the terror of a creature wounded, abandoned, left with only a fading instinct to protect herself and the tiny lives inside her. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He knew that one wrong move, one tiny misstep, and she'd bolt into the darkness, vanishing, leaving him with a regret that would haunt him forever. Yet he also saw the desperation in her ragged breaths, the quiver of her bony legs. She had no strength left to run far, and if he did nothing, she'd birth her pups right there on the cold ground, with no one by her side, no one to shield her. Daniel killed the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the tension, as if the whole world held its breath with him. He pushed the door open and stepped out, the night's chill slicing through his thin jacket, though he barely noticed. Inside him raged a storm of emotions, worry, pity, and a fierce, unfamiliar urge he'd never felt before. "Hey girl," he said, his voice soft as a lullaby, masking the tremor in his heart, "don't be scared, I won't hurt you." But she, later named Alma, flinched, retreating another step toward the shadows. Her brown eyes darted, seeking an escape, but her body betrayed her. Ribs peeked through her thin coat, each breath a struggle, and he saw the exhaustion in every faltering move. She didn't have much time, and that realization stabbed his heart like a vice closing tight. He stood still, not daring to step closer, only quietly observing. Her coat, though dirty and dull, still bore traces of a dog that had once been cared for, once had a home, once been loved. Someone had abandoned her, cast her out into this desolate place to face hunger, cold, and the piercing sting of utter loneliness. Now, she was on the brink of giving birth, with no one by her side, no family, no shelter, just the frigid night and the merciless wind. Daniel felt his eyes sting. a wave of helplessness surging within him. He couldn't turn away, couldn't bear to let her suffer for even one more second. He had to do something. Daniel rummaged through the truck, his heart pounding as he found the half-eaten sandwich from his rush lunch, a small piece of deli meat tucked between two dry slices of bread, not much, but it was all he had. He tore off a small piece and placed it on the ground a few steps away from her, then stepped back, crouching low to seem less threatening. The wind blew through, carrying the rustle of dry grass like a tense whisper. She stood motionless, her ears twitching slightly, her eyes never leaving him. Those eyes held both suspicion and a desperate longing. Daniel held his breath, silently praying she'd understand he wasn't her enemy. A long silence stretched out, as if time itself had paused, leaving just him and her in a hushed, still world. Then her nose twitched, catching the faint scent of food drifting through the cold air. Her deep brown eyes flickered between the bread and Daniel, torn between the gnawing hunger and the fear etched deep into her soul. He could sense that inner struggle, and his heart twisted. She wasn't just starving for food, but for safety, for the trust that had once been stolen from her. Finally, she took a step forward, just a small, cautious step, like walking on thin ice, but to Daniel, it was a blazing spark of hope. She lowered her head, took the piece in her mouth, and chewed slowly, her body taut as if ready to flee at any moment. He could see the hunger in the way she swallowed quickly, in the ribs protruding sharply beneath her thin fur. But more than that, he saw the fear that made her shrink into herself, like a wounded spirit too broken to dare hope again. Daniel didn't rush. He tore another piece of the sandwich, placing it a little closer this time, stepping back again, waiting patiently. In his mind, he whispered, "You're not alone, I'm here." She hesitated, her gaze fixed on his hand, weighing her choice once more. Then she stepped forward, closer now, and this time she ate more quickly, her eyes still locked on him, those eyes now tinged with a flicker of curiosity, as if asking, "Who are you? Why are you here?" A bittersweet ache bloomed in Daniel's chest. She had once belonged to someone, he could tell from the way she moved, not entirely feral but abandoned, betrayed. Now she was on the verge of giving birth, perhaps only hours away, and she was alone in this forsaken place. The thought of her facing that moment by herself was unbearable to him. He glanced at the pitch-black road stretching behind him. No light, no signs of life, the nearest town miles away. She couldn't fend for herself, no food, no shelter. If he walked away, she and her unborn pups would perish in the night's cold embrace. That realization struck his heart like a dagger. Daniel took a deep breath, tears welling up but held back, and made his choice. He wouldn't let her be alone any longer. He took the last piece of the sandwich, but this time he didn't set it on the ground. Kneeling down, he extended his hand, palm open, the morsel resting there like a heartfelt promise. "Come on, girl," he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. "I'm here to help you, I swear." She stiffened, her ears flicking back, her body crouching low, her eyes darting between the food and his hand. He could feel the turmoil within her. She wanted to trust, but fear had rooted itself deep, an invisible wall separating her from the world. Daniel said nothing more, simply holding still, letting her choose. A silence stretched on, long and eternal, as the wind grew stronger, carrying a biting cold that pierced through his jacket. He felt his heart thud heavily, each beat a tense wait for her verdict. Then she stepped forward, slow and deliberate, her nose twitching, and finally, she gently took the morsel from his hand. Daniel exhaled, tears slipping silently down his cheeks, not from sorrow, but from a joy laced with heartache. She had trusted him, even just a little, and that warmed his soul. But in that very moment, she collapsed. Her frail body trembled, crumpling to the ground, her breast shallow and ragged, as if about to fade. Panic seized Daniel, his heart shattering. She was too weak, too exhausted, and he realized she was in labor, right there on the cold roadside. A scream tore through his mind. No, not like this. There was no time to think. He shed his jacket, wrapping it around her gently so as not to frighten her, his hands shaking with both fear and resolve. She didn't resist, she was too weary to fight, her brown eyes dimming as if surrendering. "You have to hang on," he muttered, his voice breaking with emotion as he lifted her. Her body felt weightless, like a shadow on the verge of vanishing, yet he could sense the faint thumps from her belly, the tiny lives struggling to be born. He ran to the truck, tears streaming down his face, unnoticed in his urgency. He placed her on the back seat, wrapping the jacket tightly to keep her warm, hesitating for a split second. Would she panic? But she lay still, eyes half open, too weak to react. Daniel slammed the door shut, leapt into the driver's seat, and started the engine, his hands gripping the wheel until his knuckles whitened. The roar of the motor made her flinch, her ears twitching faintly, but she didn't lift her head. A chilling dread raced down his spine. She was slipping away, and he couldn't lose her. He floored the gas, headlights slicing through the darkness, his heart silently pleading, "Please let her live." The nearest vet was too far, over an hour's drive, too long for her to wait. But his house was closer, just 20 minutes away. He had blankets, water, food, and some old medical supplies from his father's first aid kit. It wasn't perfect, but it was her only chance. "You've got to hold on," he said, his voice faltering as he glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Her breaths were shallow, her chest rising and falling faintly, her round belly shifting slightly as the pups inside stirred. He felt the fragility of that life, and his chest tightened with the terror of losing her. The drive home stretched into a nightmare. Every minute was a trial. He kept checking her in the mirror, tears blurring his vision, though he wiped them away quickly, refusing to let himself falter. When he reached home, the headlights flared across the driveway. He cut the engine and bolted to the back door. She lay motionless, making him fear the worst. His heart seemed to stop. Then a weak breath escaped her. She was still alive, but barely. He scooped her up, tears falling onto her matted fur as he whispered, "I won't leave you." The warmth of the fireplace enveloped them as he stepped inside, soft light from the table lamp casting a glow on the clean wooden floor. He laid her on a thick folded blanket near the hearth, tucking it around her fragile frame to keep her warm. She didn't move, just lay there, her brown eyes clouded as if lost in another realm. Daniel knelt beside her, brushing dirt and dry leaves from her fur, his voice choked with emotion. "You're safe now, I promise. I'm here with you." She blinked slowly, and for the first time, her tail gave a faint thump against the blanket, a small gesture, but to Daniel, it was a world of hope. He sat beside her, eyes never leaving her, his heart swelling with a tangle of feelings, pity, worry, and an unexpected love he hadn't known he possessed. She was exhausted, her breathing uneven, occasionally whimpering as contractions began. Panic gripped him. She was giving birth, right there on his floor. He grabbed his phone, hands trembling as he searched for how to help a dog deliver. "Keep her warm, don't interfere unless necessary, make sure the pups breathe," he muttered, tossing the phone aside, his heart pounding as if it might burst. "You can do this," he said, tears streaming as he watched her in pain. "I believe in you." The contractions quickened, she whimpered, her body tensing with each wave of agony. Then a tiny, slick pup emerged, small, motionless. Daniel held his breath, tears falling harder, but her maternal instinct kicked in. Though weak, she licked the newborn, cleaning away the sack with slow, determined strokes. A faint squeak sounded. It was breathing. Daniel sobbed, a shaky laugh breaking through. One life had arrived. But it wasn't over. 6 more came, each birth a struggle, each cry of hers a blade in his heart. She worked tirelessly, nudging them close, her trembling body on the verge of collapse. He sat there, helpless yet awed, whispering, "You're stronger than I ever imagined." 7 pups nestled against her, seeking milk from her gaunt frame. Daniel marveled at her resilience. She'd fought with her last ounce of strength, and his heart melted with love. But then he noticed one wasn't moving. His chest tightened, tears spilling anew. He gently lifted it, hands shaking, rubbing it softly, breathing into its tiny muzzle, begging for a miracle. "Don't leave me," he whispered, his voice cracking. An eternity passed, then a weak whimper sounded. It lived. He returned it to her side. She licked it gently, her brown eyes meeting his as if in gratitude. Daniel sank back, tears mingling with a smile, overwhelmed by wordless joy. As the first light crept through the window, she, now named Luna, gazed at him, her brown eyes no longer fearful but radiant with peace and trust. Her tail wagged faintly as he rose to get food, and she followed him to the kitchen, her steps shaky but resolute. For the first time, she ate without hesitation, and when he rested his hand on her head, whispering, "Luna, you're my home," she leaned into his touch, as if accepting him as all she'd ever longed for. Luna and her 7 pups had found a haven, free from hunger and loneliness. And Daniel, in that fateful night, didn't just save them, he rediscovered a piece of his heart he'd lost, in the love and faith of a stray dog. This story is a journey of tears, glimmers of hope, and a love that transcends all darkness. Luna didn't just survive, she was reborn, and together with Daniel, they healed each other. If your heart stirs, hold on to that feeling, for sometimes, the most beautiful things come from the moments we least expect. When the first rays of the new day flooded through the window, bathing the small room in gold, Luna lay there, curled around her 7 tiny pups, her deep brown eyes now glowing with a peace she'd never known before. Daniel sat beside her, his hand resting gently on her head, feeling the warmth from her thin but mighty frame. Last night, they'd faced the darkness together, not just the chill of the lonely road, but the solitude that had imprisoned them both in chests that seemed to have no room left for hope. Luna, once a forsaken stray trembling in despair, had found not just a shelter, but a heart willing to love her unconditionally. And Daniel, once a man drifting through life with the unseen scars of isolation, had found light in those brown eyes, a light of trust, of love, and of a family he never dreamed he'd have. Their story is not just a miracle in the dead of night, it's proof that even when the world turns its back, there are always souls ready to reach out, ready to fight to bring warmth to one another. Luna didn't merely survive hunger, cold, and fear, she was reborn, carrying 7 tiny lives to remind Daniel that life is worth living more than he ever believed. And Daniel, with every tear that fell in the darkness, learned that sometimes, saving someone else is also saving yourself. They found each other in the wilderness, healed each other through wordless wounds, and together wrote a new beginning, a beginning where pain transforms into hope, and loneliness melts away in love. As Daniel looked at Luna, then at the pups nestled against their mother, he smiled, a true smile, the first in years. "We're a family, aren't we?" he whispered, and Luna, as if understanding, gave a faint wag of her tail, her eyes shining as if to say, "Yes, and I'll never leave you." From that moment, they were more than man and dog. They were each other's light, each other's home, a living testament that love can take root even in the most barren soil. If this story touches your heart, remember that out there, every day, there are still Lunas waiting, and Daniels searching for a reason to believe in miracles. Don't turn away from lost souls, for sometimes, a single outstretched hand is enough to change an entire world. Luna and Daniel did it, and perhaps so can you.